Your Excellencies, Mr. Speaker, honored guests, ladies and gentlemen, may I extend a warm welcome, varmt välkomna, to this seminar on the demilitarisation and neutralization of the Åland Islands. My name is Susanne Eriksson. I'm the Secretary General for the Parliament of Åland, and I have the honor to guiding you through this seminar today. We are really delighted to have the opportunity to introduce such high-ranking representatives of both Finland and Sweden, who between them represent such a breadth and depth of knowledge regarding the special status of Åland in the international context. Due to unfavorable weather conditions, as you have all noticed, the President and the ministers are unfortunately prevented from taking part in the seminar in person. The seminar will, however, still take place as planned with the President and ministers participating digitally. After the first part of the seminar, there will be a short break during coffee will be served at this floor outside here. After the break, the seminar will continue with a panel discussion, something I personally am looking very much forward to, given that time does not permit questions during the first part of the seminar. To begin with, I would like to turn the floor to the Speaker of the Åland Parliament, Mr. Bert Häggblom.
Honorable Mr. President, honorable ministers and ambassadors, consuls, distinguished seminar participants. It's a great privilege to welcome you all to this seminar on the theme, the demilitarisation and neutralization of Åland, establishing force for peace in the region. We are grateful and delighted that among many of you heeded our invitation. We have with us here today 30 ambassadors, and we are especially delighted that the Republic's President, Minister for Foreign Affairs, and Minister for Åland are able to take part in the seminar together with experts from the Orland Violence Peace Institute. As we heard, they are digitally with us today. So that we're thankful to them that they do that, because the weather goes. The seminar is taking place to celebrate that it's 100 year today when the Convention of the Demilitarisation and Neutralization of the Åland Island. It is wonderful to be able to celebrate such a prospering and long-standing arrangement, and one deemed to signify not only the original signatories, but also to all countries in the region, is part of the customary international law. As we all know, the Convention of 1921 is not the only arrangement governing the demilitarisation of the Åland Islands. It is also enforced by several other agreements that are very much alive. The President himself has coined the phrase, the Helsinki spirit, to represent transparency and dialogue, trust and confidence, as well as disarmament and diplomacy. We find this expression to be very apt, and in particular context, we can form very much in line with the Åland status. It is therefore our hope that the President can, in various ways, incorporate demilitarisation and neutralisation into the ongoing revival of the Helsinki spirit, perhaps by arranging one of the events on the Åland Island. Recognition of the Åland Island status by the Council of League of Nations was part of a holistic solution to the ongoing conflict, and through the Council's decision, demilitarisation and neutralisation became forever associated with our autonomy. Why the Åland Islanders themselves consider the status to be self-evident, as the people knowledge and the awareness has increased. So demilitarisation and neutralisation have come to be viewed as increasingly significant elements of the Åland special status, alongside autonomy. At 100 years for Åland, this 100 years, by passing years, the magnitude and durability of the arrangement have only become more apparent. The continued relevance and topicality of the covenant is demonstrated by the attention paid to demilitarisation and neutralisation, not least through today's seminar. My hope is that this seminar will show that demilitarisation and neutralisation have come to carry a new significance in a new era, and that they can continue to be a model for stable relationship in a turbulent world. With these words, I would like again to warmly welcome you to this seminar, which I hope will provide new ideas and perspectives on the status of 100 years with well worth celebrating. May Fredens öar, island of peace, be a role model for resolving future conflicts. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And now it is a great honor for me to give the floor, or maybe I should say the TV screen, over to Mr. Sauli Niinistö, President of the Republic of Finland, for the opening speech. Welcome, Mr. President.
Honorable ambassadors, ladies and gentlemen, kära ålänningar. It's a great pleasure for me to open this seminar today. Because of the stormy weather, flight to Åland was impossible. Unfortunately, I can't join you physically to commemorate the Convention on the Non-Fortification and Neutralization of the Åland Islands as part of the celebrating the 100th anniversary of the Åland's autonomy. It was exactly 100 years ago when the representatives of Denmark, Estonia, Finland, France, Germany, Italy, Latvia, Poland, Sweden, and the United Kingdom gathered together in Paris to sign this landmark convention. Over time, the convention has only grown in relevance, becoming an important factor underpinning the Åland Islands' autonomy, as well as regional security and stability. Let me warmly congratulate the host Ålands Lagting for organizing this event. The seminar and its distinguished guests are a sign of the high international esteem in which both the islands and the convention are held. Ladies and gentlemen, according to the preamble to the convention, it was signed in order that these islands may never become a cause of danger from the military point of view. To fully appreciate the somber tone of these words, one needs to remember the history. During the Crimean War in 1854-56, the islands had already become a focal point in a Europe-wide conflict, resulting in the demilitarisation of the islands. After Finland gained its independence in 1917, the question of Åland's status almost resulted in an open conflict between Finland and Sweden. The solution to this problem was found through international cooperation. The newly established League of Nations granted Finland sovereignty over Åland in 1921. At the same time, Finland made a commitment to guarantee the tradition of the Swedish language and wide self-government on the island, along with the historically rooted principles of neutrality and demilitarisation that were enshrined in international guarantees in the Åland Convention. This combination of autonomy, neutrality and demilitarisation has a unique history that resulted in a unique solution. A solution that was and is based on openness, diplomacy and trust. It is also a solution that has stood the test of time and has remained strong even during stormy circumstances. We must all take heed of the firm international commitment to uphold and respect the island's status and play our role in ensuring that the principles underpinning the Convention also remain robust in the future. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm happy to note that an issue that was once in danger of generating conflict has been successfully resolved in a manner that is favorable to all. The Åland Islands is a vibrant community and an important and enriching autonomous part of Finland. It is also one of the many bridges that bring Finland and Sweden increasingly close together. The memories of a threatening conflict are in the distant past. At the same time, it's worth remembering that the Convention has a strong basis in international law. To succeed not only in its own region, but also globally, commitment to international law and rules-based international order is needed. Unfortunately, adherence to our common principles can't be taken for granted. On the contrary, upholding international order and legal principles requires constant work and care. The Convention can also have an impact beyond the Baltic Sea region. The rules-based international order and multilateral system are prerequisites for global security, and the Åland Convention is a part of this fabric. Finland is fully committed to upholding international law and international security. But legal principles, however powerful and important, are not enough. The values that underpin them, a willingness of parties to engage in an open-minded dialogue, to build trust, and to seek common solutions, can have global significance. If and when the order breaks down, or we are lacking in mutual trust and understanding, we need dialogue. In order to ensure that our people can live in true and lasting peace, we need to rebuild trust. This is why Finland wants to strengthen the international system and our common security. This is why we need to revive the spirit of Helsinki, the spirit of dialogue that grew from the final act of the Conference on Security and Cooperation in Europe, which was signed in Helsinki almost 50 years ago in 1975. Ladies and gentlemen, the Åland Convention has been and still is a stabilising force for the peace even in Åland region. It is not a historical relic, but a living entity and a very much needed regime in the Baltic Sea region. Today, the Convention will be discussed from many perspectives and from different points of view. I'm convinced that by doing so in a spirit of dialogue, cooperation and trust, we can not only commemorate the Convention in the way that it deserves, but we can find new ways to strengthen the continued success of the Convention and the Åland Islands. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. President, for sharing your important opinion on this matter. It's now my honor to turn the floor over to the Finnish Minister for Foreign Affairs, Pekka Haavisto, who also will give his speech digitally. Minister Haavisto will be discussing the demilitarisation and neutralisation of the Åland Islands as a stabilising force for peace in the region. Minister Haavisto.
Mr. President, Madam Premier, Mr. Speaker of the Åland Parliament, Ministers, Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, bästa vänner. The Åland Islands in the hands of a foreign power is like a pistol aimed at the heart of Sweden. Similar quotes have their place in history in relation to other conflicts as well, to my understanding. However, this quote is a free translation of a quote often stumbled upon when one reads the history books on the conflict between Finland and Sweden 100 years ago. The demilitarisation and neutralisation of the Åland Islands was one element of the conflict resolution by the League of Nations in 1920, with the aim of stabilising the region and bringing lasting peace to it. Today, one can say that Åland Islands' position in the sea between Finland and Sweden is like a bridge between us. The daily life of many people from Åland, be it business, studies or hobbies, is closely connected with both Finland and Sweden. We are happy to celebrate 100 years of autonomy for the Åland Islands together. The history of the Åland Islands, Finland and Sweden is closely linked together. The Åland Islands was a part of Sweden until 1809, when Sweden lost it and Finland to Russia. As we know, Finland celebrated its centenary a few years ago as we gained our independence from Russia in 1917. Independent Finland came to include the same areas as the Grand Duchy of Finland and hence the Åland Islands. Back in those days, a movement arose on the Åland Island regarding reunification with Sweden. The idea gained strong support from Sweden. As the conflict strained the relations between the two neighbors, Finland and Sweden, the issue was taken to the League of Nations to be solved. In its decision of the 24th June 1921, the League of Nations concluded that first, sovereignty of the Åland Islands is recognized to belong to Finland. Second, further guarantees to be inserted in the autonomy law should aim at preservation of the Swedish language and at maintenance of the landed property in the hands of the islanders, and that 3. An international agreement in respect to non-fortification and the neutralization of the archipelago should guarantee to the Swedish people and to all the countries concerned that the Åland Islands will never become a source of danger from a military point of view. The Convention of 1856 should be replaced by a broader agreement placed under the guarantee of all the powers concerned. The Convention of 1856 was the first time the international law status of the Åland Islands was dealt with. The Convention on the Demilitarisation of the Åland Islands was concluded between Russia, Great Britain and France in Paris on 30th March 1856, after the Crimean War. This convention was complemented with a new multilateral convention respecting the non-fortification and neutralization of the Åland Islands, signed in Geneva on 20th October 1921. Finland and the Soviet Union concluded a separate treaty concerning the Åland Islands on 21st October 1940. The treaty was reinstated in 1948 after the Second World War. The Russian consulate in Mariehamn was also established in the Treaty of 1940. Further, the Paris Peace Treaty of 1947 concluded that the Åland Islands shall remain demilitarized in accordance with the situation as it then was. Hence, the international law status of the Åland Island remains on solid ground. The 1921 Convention also specifically concludes that the provisions of the Convention shall remain in force in spite of any changes that may take place in the present status quo in the Baltic Sea. The status of the Åland Islands is also regarded as customary law, binding on all states in the region. Let me stress the importance of this provision in the Convention. Shall remain in force in spite of any changes that may take place in the present status quo in the Baltic Sea. The Baltic Sea region is located in a strategically important area which directly reflects changes in the international security situation. We see that security in Northern Europe is increasingly interlinked. Any shifts in the security situation in the Baltic Sea region, the Arctic neighborhood and the North Atlantic are closely connected. The increasing competition between the great powers and weakening commitment to the rules-based international system and international law have also increased tensions in the Baltic Sea region. After a peak in military action and tensions since 2014, the security situation in the Baltic Sea has now slightly stabilized. Finland aims to reduce tensions as we have great interest in the stability of the Baltic Sea. One of the main objectives of our close cooperation with Sweden is to strengthen security on the Baltic Sea. In collaboration with all Nordic and Baltic countries, we promote the security of the region. It's also important to engage in dialogue with Russia on issues related to the Baltic Sea and its security. The Åland Islands, situated in the middle of the Baltic Sea, is affected by the shifts in tension in the region. The government report on Finnish foreign and security policy from 2020 states that the province of the Åland Islands has recognized status under international law and that this does not prevent Finland from intensifying its defense cooperation with various actors. With this, I return to the argument that the international law status of the Åland Island remains on solid ground. The convention has lasted for 100 years and stands for stability and peace in the region. The demilitarisation and the neutralisation as concepts have lasted through varied times, and their basis remains the same. Apart from its legally binding nature, it has also symbolic weight, which in turn creates security and stability. It is also an important example of rules-based multilateral cooperation. Your Excellencies, according to the government programme, a stronger priority will be placed on conflict prevention, mediation and peace building in Finland's foreign policy. We will do this by, for example, increasing our participation in the United Nations mediation and dialogue processes. Stepping up networking with Finnish peace mediation actors is another important tool. We will continue to promote women's meaningful participation in peace talks and peace building, with an emphasis on safeguarding women's and girls' rights in peace processes. We will also support activities related to the inclusion of youth in peace processes. The Centre for Peace Mediation, a new unit that has started its work at the Ministry last October, has the important task of looking ways to increase our concrete support for peace processes. Violent conflicts are becoming more complex. This change challenges traditional peace mediation. In the changing conflict landscape, a multi-track approach will be key. All actors should work in a complementary and coordinated manner. Local ownership and inclusive processes are key for creating and sustaining lasting peace. For Finland, the ownership of conflict parties is a central element. We cannot support the process unless the parties themselves are committed to it. Our task is to support the conflict parties' efforts. The Åland Islands provide an important example of how conflicts can be solved in a peaceful manner. It is one of the most well-known successes of the League of Nations. At the same time, one must remember that each violent conflict is unique. We need to try to find context-specific solutions. I'm glad that the example continues to provide inspiration for many countries and regions in the world, even today. I'm also glad that we have been able to promote the Åland Islands example at very high level. For example, in the European Union, in summer 2019, the security policy ambassadors visited Mariehamn during their visit to Finland. We had an excellent discussion on peace mediation facilitated by the Åland Islands Peace Institute and the CMI. The contact group between the Ministry for Foreign Affairs of Finland and the Government of Åland was established over 20 years ago in 1998 to develop and increase the use of the Åland example in international contexts and also to increase awareness about the province and contacts with it. The group actively holds seminars with this aim in mind, the next of which will be held during the Åland 100 celebrations in The Hague at the Peace Palace, in cooperation with our embassy there. Likewise, at the initiative of the Government of Åland, Finland has been pleased to introduce the self-governing province of the Åland Islands as a new associate member of UNESCO during the General Conference in November. This is also a testimony to the Åland Islands' commitment to UNESCO's work. We look forward to a positive stand by UNESCO's General Conference and having the Åland Islands as UNESCO's 12th associate member. The demilitarisation and neutralisation of the Åland Islands is an important piece in the puzzle of creating a sustainable and lasting solution to the conflict between Finland and Sweden. I know that sustainability issues are high on the political agenda of Åland. In this regard, I want to pay tribute to the Åland Islands' valuable work on sustainability issues, which led to the Åland Islands Sustainability Agenda, the winning the European Sustainability Award in 2019. With this, I conclude my speech and once again pay tribute to the 100-year-old convention and the centenary of the Åland Islands. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Haavisto, Minister Haavisto, for your interesting speech. Minister Haavisto talked about Åland as a bridge between Finland and Sweden, and this brings me over to the next speaker. I would like to introduce to you Mr. Robert Rydberg, Sweden's Deputy Minister for Foreign Affairs, and he will be discussing the international lessons from the Åland Demilitarisation and Neutralization. Welcome, Mr. Rydberg.
Thank you very much. Herr talman, fru lantråd, lagtingsledamöter, ministrar, excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. I am honored to be here in Mariehamn to celebrate, together with you, 100 years of self-government and autonomy of the Åland Islands. I would like to thank the Speaker and the Parliament of Åland for the invitation and for arranging today's event. I look forward to our discussion on the demilitarisation and neutralisation of Åland. This seminar is indeed an opportunity to look back at history, but also to see how decisions in the past shape our present realities and provide helpful lessons for the future. In the aftermath of the First World War, the Åland Island was a difficult issue for the government of Sweden. Tensions were high, and there was great uncertainty on how to move forward. The decision by the Council of the League of Nations and the subsequent Åland Convention created a unique arrangement in which wise leaders at the time used international law and diplomacy to resolve a potentially dangerous dispute of sovereignty. By Finland granting Åland autonomy and cultural rights, and by Sweden accepting the decision by the League of Nations with Åland remaining in Finland, conflict was averted. Furthermore, it has significantly contributed to Sweden and Finland having today a uniquely close cooperation and relationship. There are few countries today, if any, that are as close as Sweden and Finland. Together we are strong defenders of international law and democracy. We stand shoulder to shoulder in defending human rights, both here in Europe and internationally. We are developing a uniquely close cooperation also on security. Sweden has this year particularly benefited from Finland's support for our chairpersonship of the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe. Were it not for the solution found to the Åland issue, Sweden and Finland would not be where we are today. And the agreement has held. It has been respected in the Second World War, in the Cold War, and in the latest period of unfortunately increased tension in our part of the world. It continues to ensure the demilitarization of Åland. The classic principle of the freedom of the seas, mare liberum, remains the cornerstone of the rules and principles of international law applicable here in the Baltic Sea. This is a key principle for us, with the Baltic Sea being open for all states, including non-Baltic ones. This openness has also been important for our security. At the same time, the special solutions regarding Åland, including demilitarization, has contributed to preventing conflict and to create trust. It is telling that the demilitarization of Åland was the focus of an agreement between France, Great Britain and Russia already in 1856. These great powers of Europe found reassurances in the demilitarisation of this part of the Baltic Sea, with the central and strategic location it held on many military maps in Europe. Allow me in this connection also to convey our appreciation for the work being done by the Åland Peace Institute. Your work to encourage discussions on the Åland example between academia, political establishment and civil society representatives remains crucial. It is so because we see many of the ingredients of the Åland question in 1921 very much present today in frozen or hot conflicts in other parts of Europe and the world, with linguistic and other minorities caught between neighboring states, too often not ready to take a legal, rational and long-term approach, or bent on using or abusing a privileged power position. This is, I may add, very much the reality with which Sweden continues to work in holding this year's chairpersonship of the OSCE. Our priorities have remained to defend the European security order, firmly based in international law, to uphold the broad security concept of the OSCE, and to address the many frozen or not so frozen conflicts in the region, Ukraine being a case in point. Also in exercising this both challenging and rewarding responsibility, Sweden highly appreciates the solid support of Finland. We share the same commitment to international law, to peaceful settlements of disputes, and to the power of negotiation and diplomacy. For this we are, of course, inspired by our own historic experiences, some separate, some shared, including the Åland settlement. The world needs good examples of how negotiation and diplomacy can bring lasting peace and prosperity. Åland was and remains a symbol of peace, and the value of the Åland example for international peacemaking should not be underestimated. Ladies and gentlemen, I think it's a moving experience for all of us to be able to take part in this celebration, most of us, not via Zoom or Skype, but in real life. It reminds us of what we have gone through in the last 18 months. The pandemic has presented particular challenges to our Nordic border regions, Åland being no exception, and our governments have had difficult issues to tackle. That said, overall cooperation between the Nordic countries has been close also during the pandemic, and this has helped us to find pragmatic solutions. Now, as we and the world are hopefully opening up, there are new opportunities to further strengthen our cooperation. I particularly welcome that our respective ministers for Nordic cooperation are looking at how to learn from the crisis, strengthen collaboration, and safeguard our integration. On a final note, let me say that for Sweden, this centennial is also about celebrating our friendship with Åland. Few other countries and regions can boast of such close people-to-people contacts as between neighbors here in the Åland Islands and in Sweden. Many young people from Åland choose to study in Sweden, and some Swedes here in Åland. Many Swedes work in Åland and vice versa. Close cultural cooperation and joint festivals take place. And we share, of course, the Swedish language. Almost 10% of the population of Åland was born in Sweden, and there are even more people from Åland living in Sweden. These are important bonds to appreciate and to safeguard. Let us cherish the wisdom of our leaders 100 years ago, who laid a basis that continues to serve Åland, all of Finland and Sweden so well, and continues to inspire us to do our part in promoting peace and prosperity in our neighborhood and well beyond. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Rydberg, for your interesting contribution. Now the time has come to introduce Finland's Minister for Justice as Minister for Åland, as we know her here on the Åland Islands, Anna-Maja Henriksson. She will be discussing the autonomy of Åland from a historical perspective, but also as an example of a successful solution. Welcome, Mrs. Henriksson.
Jag skulle väldigt gärna ha varit på Åland idag, men på grund av vädret så blev det omöjligt. Men vi ska göra en bra dag av den här dagen i alla fall. Mr. President, distinguished ambassadors, members of the Parliament of Åland, ladies and gentlemen, it's a great pleasure for me to attend this seminar, which is one of the many events celebrating the centenary of the autonomy of Åland. This anniversary year of Åland's autonomy is being celebrated in the Åland Islands, in Finland and internationally. The year marks exactly 100 years since the League of Nations issued its decision on the question of Åland's status. Finland and Sweden ratified the decision on Åland's affiliation to Finland and on the autonomy of Åland on the 27th of June 1921. The decision marked an important step for the future of both Åland and Finland. What is more, today marks the centenary of the signing of the convention relating to the Non-Fortification and Neutralization of the Åland Islands, or the Åland Convention as it is called. The combination of demilitarisation, neutralization and autonomy is unique. The combination brings opportunities and highlights the importance of cooperation and communication. The autonomy of Åland came into being in the aftermath of the First World War. It is easy to imagine people's concerns and worry at that time, not knowing how international relations would develop, and certainly not knowing how the young Republic of Finland would cope in the international community. Nor is it difficult to understand the attitude of the young Republic of Finland towards the Åland Islands. Under Swedish rule, Åland had already belonged administratively to the eastern part of the Swedish state, and Åland had also been part of Finland when Finland was an autonomous part of the Russian Empire. In addition, despite its demilitarized status, Åland was still a region of military strategic interest. We can easily imagine that the fact that the Åland Islands belonged to Finland was a matter of prestige for the young republic. In the peace talks in Paris after the Crimean War, Sweden had already demanded sovereignty over the Åland Islands. In 1917, the situation changed because the opponent was no longer the Russian Empire, but the new Republic of Finland. However, the question of Åland's status developed into a conflict between Sweden and Finland for some time. But, as we know, this conflict was resolved by the Åland Agreement in the Council of the League of Nations between Sweden and Finland. In 1919, the Finnish government submitted to Parliament a proposal for an act on the autonomy of Åland. It includes an often quoted statement that the residents of the Åland Islands would be guaranteed the opportunity to organize their own lives as freely as possible for a province that does not constitute a country of its own. In the Åland Agreement, Finland resolved to ensure and guarantee the preservation of the Swedish language, culture and local customs of the residents of Åland, and to include in the Act on Autonomy certain guarantees concerning the language of education, the right to redeem land surrendered to non-residents, the right to vote in municipal elections and elections to Parliament of Åland, the appointment of the governor, and the right to use a certain part of the taxes collected in the province for its own needs. However, this solution was received with disappointment in the Åland Islands, and there existed some tension in the relations between Åland and Finland until the Second World War. After the war, a new Autonomy Act was passed in 1951. Åland's legislative powers were increased and a flag was adopted as a significant symbol. Presidents of the Republic, Paasikivi and Kekkonen, welcomed the development of self-government, and given the strong position of these presidents, relations improved favorably. Since then, a lot has happened. The last time I served as Minister of Justice, first in the government of Prime Minister Katainen and then in the government of Prime Minister Stubb, I set up the Åland Committee, which was tasked with reforming the Act on the Autonomy of Åland. However, the committee did not conclude the work back then. Now, however, in the government of Prime Minister Marin, as Minister of Justice and the minister responsible for matters concerning the Orland Violence, I can say that the overall reform of the Autonomy Act is finally underway. We are doing our best to make it happen this time. We still have negotiations ahead of us, but I'm hopeful and I hope that we will get a result. Distinguished guests, during the centenary year of the Autonomy of Åland, events have been planned that highlight in international connections the success of Åland's self-government that serve as an example of how such autonomy works in practice. The Autonomy Act is unique in that both the Parliament of Finland and the Parliament of Åland must approve its amendments. We have spent many working hours on this reform. While it has not always been easy to find compromises, all parties have had the will to keep going. In reforms such as this, we recognize how important it is to work together, to respect each other, and the most essential element, to deepen trust in each other. For me, it is important to maintain a good relationship between the Åland Islands and the state of Finland. In this work, we must have continuous dialogue in many areas. When the current Autonomy Act was enacted, Finland and Åland were not members of the European Union. The reform of fundamental rights and the amended constitution also entered into force after the entry into force of the Autonomy Act in 1993. So much has happened in our society since then, and the legal and political framework has changed a lot. Indeed, it is time that we have an up-to-date Autonomy Act. That is, a modern act adapted to the current circumstances and using the terminology currently in use. Another aim is to clarify the relationship between the Autonomy Act and the Constitution. The key objective of the current reform of the Autonomy Act is to create a more dynamic system of autonomy for the Åland Islands. Over time, and if necessary, this will enable a smoother transfer of legislative powers in certain areas of competence from the Parliament of Finland to the Parliament of Åland. The proposal for an amended Autonomy Act contains a number of provisions aimed at developing and streamlining cooperation between the State of Finland and the authorities of Åland. We have seen that there is need for this. This year, 100 years after the agreement concerning the Åland Islands was reached, it still remains a unique solution in the world and serves as a good example of how situations of this kind can be resolved. The example of Åland was taken into use in conflict resolution efforts in the late 1980s. At this time, at the end of the Cold War, questions concerning minorities, nations, borders and identities were appearing on the world stage. The solution reached in the Åland Islands has been used as an example by different groups in various formal and informal processes for promoting peace around the world. In these contexts, Åland's example has been used to illustrate different principles or as a model for institutions and rules. Additionally, the Åland Islands have served as a physical meeting place for conflict resolution efforts. What is more, Åland is a prime example of how autonomy can be extended over time. Not all problems have to be solved at once. Self-government can be expanded at the appropriate time. We recognize, however, that no single solution can ever be universally applied to other problems, which is why we prefer to speak of Åland as an example rather than as a model. In a changing world, it is essential to reflect on the impacts on special regimes such as the demilitarisation and the neutralisation of the Åland Islands. Questions arise due to new global trends and threats. It is important to find balance between the durable and the adaptable, and therefore note the roots and stability of the demilitarisation and the neutralisation of the Åland Islands. The preconditions for the autonomy of Åland have been favourable and remain so to this day. Finland is a democratic state governed by the rule of law, and controversy over Åland's affiliation has never included any violence. Such circumstances do not exist in many of today's conflict areas. That being said, it was never self-evident that Åland would become a success story. Åland's example shows that a solution with which all the parties were initially dissatisfied can be successful in the long term. Thank you for your attention, and I would also like to extend my warmest congratulations to the Åland Islands and wish everyone a wonderful 100 years anniversary. Thank you. Tack så mycket.
Thank you, Minister Henriksson. The role of the demilitarization and neutralization in the Åland solution is the subject addressed by our next speaker, Sia Spiliopoulo-Åkermark, Associate Professor in International Law and Director of the important Åland Island Peace Institute. Welcome, Sia.
Honorable Mr. President, Ministers, Landråd, Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, to celebrate the centenarian is a unique opportunity. This is in fact my first centennial party ever. So I take the chance to discuss with you the implications of the fact that the 1921 Convention on the Non-Fortification and Neutralization of the Åland Islands is an integral part of the Åland solution as a whole. What does it really mean? Mrs. Henriksson made a little bit of a deviation into the autonomy aspects, and I will return then back to the international aspects linked to issues of security. I will reveal already now my main message. It is that the negotiation of the totality of the solution, which involved the sovereignty over the islands, security issues, the division of power, and language and cultural guarantees, this process was a comprehensive, multi-level process that involved some of the brightest minds of international diplomacy and law at that time. It was not an achievement by the Ålanders. It was not an achievement by Finland. It was not an achievement by Sweden, nor was it of the League of Nations alone. It was a broad collective effort at local, national, regional, and international levels. What someone earlier said, a multi-track diplomacy before the word even existed. It shows, I think, how demanding conflict resolution is, even in the best of situations. And I put myself the question, at our time of rather nationalist spirit and a huge pressure of constant time issues, is there such perseverance? This great opportunity of today gives me the chance to review some of the things I have learned over 30 years, including in a 3-year research project on the demilitarization and neutralization experiences, a project which involved several highly qualified researchers and a fantastic board of advisors from a number of countries. We would, we would really welcome the opportunity to share our results also outside the Åland Islands. The 1921 Convention on the Non-Fortification and Neutralization of the Islands was signed in Geneva, and it did not pop up out of the blue, as is usually the case. It was negotiated as a response and continuation of the experiences before and during World War I and the Civil War in Finland. It was a true learning by doing in the early days of institutional multilateralism. The decision of June 24th, 1921, made clear already at that point what the components of the solution should be. So in fact, it is the Åland example which celebrates its centenary anniversary this year. What was in place, as has been mentioned by several of the previous speakers, was the 1856 Convention. As our focus today is on the 1921 Convention, I will not expand too much on it, but to mention that according to the Finnish author and international lawyer Jan Otto Söderhjelm, he was of the view of many others that the Paris Peace Treaty, including its Åland part, was also binding for Austria, Prussia, and Sardinia, which I think is interesting in view of the fact that both the Commission of Jurists as well as the Commission of Rapporteurs that prepared the adoption of the decision by the League of Council agreed on the continued validity of the 1856 treaty and, moreover, of the need for a new convention which would address the gaps revealed in the 1856 regime. During the First World War, things had changed, and Russia, Great Britain, and France were now allies. They tolerated, alongside with Sweden, what was explained by Russia as temporary fortifications necessary at the time of war in view of the aggressive policies, mainly by Germany, in the Baltic Sea. Because after all, the 1856 Convention did not regulate the ramifications of the right to self-defense at time of war, by contrast to what was the case, for instance, in the Ionian Islands at that same time. Of course, the Russian fortifications were demolished in 1918, and the Commission of Jurists on Åland had started its work already in summer 1920 and described the norms pertaining to the demilitarization of the islands as un règlement d'intérêt européen, that is, as norms of a European interest, thus acknowledging the need for a security solution far beyond the near region of Sweden, Finland, and the northern Baltic Sea. The Commission of Jurists was composed by the French Ferdinand Larnaud, the Dutch Antonio Stryken, and the Swiss Max Huber, with the Belgian Georges Kekenbeek as its secretary. I'm very happy that so many of the states here are represented among the ambassadors. They were highly engaged personally and well-known, heavy names, if you so want, and the League of Nations was seen as a workable tool. Also, the Commission of Rapporteurs discussed extensively the issue of the demilitarization and neutralization of the islands and came to similar conclusions. In fact, the Commission of Rapporteurs said, moins il y aura d'appareils militaires à Åland, plus la tranquillité y sera assurée. This is pretty clear. The less military presence, the more calm the situation will be. So this was an understanding linking the overall thinking of the Commission vis-à-vis the Åland Islands. The Commission was then composed again by Belgian Baron Beyance, the Swiss Felix Calander, and the Jewish-American lawyer Abram Elkus, who was heavily involved in the Armenian genocide experience. In the treatment of the matter in the Council, we also find the Chinese President V. Queen Wellington Koo, who opened the demilitarization conference, the Danish diplomat Herman Anke Bernhoft, who was elected as chair of the conference, and he had been involved in the North Schleswig-Söderjylland issue, as well as later on in the East Greenland case in front of the Permanent Court of International Justice. The secretary of the Demilitarization and Neutralization Conference was no one else than Donizio Ancelotti, the Italian, who was to become a judge at the Permanent Court of International Justice. And in the background, we found the Japanese diplomat Inasoni Tobe, vice president of the Council, who said in Brussels in September 1920, certainly, a calm discussion of jurists has nothing in it to appeal to the lovers of the spectacular, to whom a war between Finland and Sweden would have afforded something spectacular. Interestingly, Ancelotti and Kekenbeek wrote also a specific note on the links between Åland, the demilitarization, and the idea of collective security. So both the commissions, as well as the League of Nations, saw this as a matter of an international character. However, the negotiations did not only involve peace-loving, inclined lawyers and diplomats. In the conference negotiating the convention were also a number of militaries and a close contact with the military elites. In the Finnish delegation, we found Oskar Paulenkell, and the Danish delegation included Captain Henry Wenck, who was the chief of staff in the Danish Navy, for instance. So, the Åland Convention on Non-Fortification and Neutralization was not a hasty or impulsive result of a few weeks in October 1921. It was a continuation of a deep engagement and thorough examination of the issues from a political, legal, diplomatic, and military perspectives. I feel grateful for and impressed by the amount of intellectual and diplomatic activity invested in the Åland Islands at that time. I am also impressed, but not particularly surprised in view of the above, by the number of ambassadors present here today. Your presence honors the Åland solution and confirms its continued relevance in international affairs. Needless to say, it is Finland, Sweden, and the Ålanders who had no formal standing and were quite cautious at that time, who have to live through the process on a day-to-day basis. As it has been said many times before, it was a reasonably tolerable compromise. Someone could even say it is about living with disappointment. All sides were reasonably disappointed with regard to some claims, but also found response to some of the others. And you may recall that Hjalmar Branting received the Nobel Peace Prize in 1921 precisely because Sweden accepted the solution and did not pursue the issue. So, the Åland solution consists of these interlocked elements: the issue of separation and division of power, the government, which is not delegated. And I think this is something misunderstood in many international occasions. It has its own standing. It's not given by the Finnish constitution. It's primordial, if you so want. And the appointment of the governor who joins us today is part of this special arrangement in the power relations. Issues of the language and culture are the second aspect of the Åland solution, and they rely on the language of education, for instance, the right to domicile, but also the precondition of a bilingual constitution of Finland, something which is not working very well from the perspective of the Åland Islands. And finally, the issue of security, which is not only the demilitarization and neutralization regimes, but also through provisions about local security and Swedish-speaking police under the responsibility of the Åland Islands, and the continued validity of the exemptions to conscription, which are not part of the demilitarization formally, but which both insiders and outsiders often see as intimately linked to the demilitarization regime. There are other examples from that time that are somehow similar. Svalbard-Spitsbergen Treaty is one obvious example that comes into mind, even though the setup is very different. And a little later, the Montreux Convention of 1936 concerning the Bosporus and Dardanelles, which are very much under debate currently. So what I'm saying is that this wooden knot puzzle, as René Nyberg has aptly put it, of the Åland solution does not only have implications for the Åland Islands and the nearby security, but actually affect the conditions and situations in a large number of other states and regimes as well. It is this unique experience that functions as a source of hope and inspiration to all those that we meet who visit Åland and who inquire better knowledge and understanding about what Åland is all about. We do not have the time to go through the specific provisions of the 1921 Convention in detail, and I'm very happy, I must say, I'm delighted that Minister Haavisto already has dealt with Article 8 in the Convention, which says that the Convention should prevail under all circumstances in the Baltic Sea. But 2 words about the difference of concepts, the concept of demilitarization and the concept of neutralization. Articles 3 through to 5 entail the basic restrictions on fortifications and military activities. And all exceptions are to be interpreted in a limited way and are only possible in exceptional circumstances. This basic platform applies all the time, at times of peace and at times of war. But then you have the next layer, Articles 6 and 7, which create the concept of neutralization, which is different from the idea of a neutrality of states. That is, that a state has to be kept completely outside military alliances. And I'm delighted that both Ireland and Austria are with us today. The neutralization means that a limited territory is exempted from the military activities during war. And this does not preclude the right to self-defense for Finland, but this right to self-defense is highly regulated through the Convention. And in fact, Article 8, mentioned by Minister Haavisto, found its continuation in the Vienna Convention on the Law of Treaties, where the idea is that treaties that concern the establishment and regulation of boundaries are not affected by fundamental changes of circumstances. So you see how ideas in the Demilitarisation Convention find their way in other aspects of international law. But we still hear voices, also here in Finland, in our nearby region, who say we cannot have a military vacuum. Well, such voices disregard the power of words. They do not understand what Nitobe meant when he said the lovers of the spectacular. The alternative to words is nothing but armed force with the consequence of war, and war means nothing but death. I will not want to end my speech in a gloomy tone, so I decided I will find out what do really old people who have turned 100 say as advice to us youngsters. And then I found this fantastic YouTube series which is called Guide to Living Your Best Life. And if you like old ladies, you will like that clip. So, dear ambassadors, your excellencies, what do they say? They say, get yourself involved. Look for peace because it is not easy to find. Think for yourself. And the one I like most of all, if you give up on yourself, shame on you. So let us not give up on the words, let us not give up on the ambition of peace, which is our common vision. Let us continue the provocation towards the lovers of the spectacular. Thank you.
Thank you, Director C.S. Biliopoulos-Åkermark, for your very interesting contribution. Åsa Gustafsson is a Deputy Director at the Swedish Ministry for Foreign Affairs, and perhaps more important today, a researcher in international law at Åbo Academy University. And I would like to turn the floor over to Mrs. Gustafsson, who will discuss demilitarisation and neutralisation in the context of the European security. Welcome.
Honourable President, Ministers, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. I'm very honoured to have been invited to this occasion. As was mentioned, the theme for my presentation is the Åland Islands status as demilitarised and neutralised in the context of the EU Common Security and Defence Policy. The acronym used often in the EU is, of course, the CSDP. It was originally launched in 1999. I will give a brief overview of security and defence developments in the EU and thereafter point to some specific aspects and implications for the Åland status as demilitarised and neutralised. The idea of a security or defence alliance in Europe is as old as the Union itself, but attempts made have failed. However, new efforts are being made, emanating from a heightened sense of insecurity in the EU. Views differ on what exactly this will lead to, and it's an ongoing work. When looking closer at security developments, it is interesting to note how the formulations in two major EU strategic documents, security documents, have changed. In the first European Security Strategy of 2003, it was, for instance, stated that Europe has never been so prosperous, so secure, nor so free. But in the EU Global Strategy of 2016, there were other formulations or of another character, such as we live in times of existential crisis, our union is under threat. In 2016, the then President of the EU Commission, Jean-Claude Juncker, proposed a defence union by 2025. And the EU Commission also launched a defence action plan that same year. Also, recently, around a month ago, the current Commission President, Ursula von der Leyen, called for a European Defence Union. Since 2016, there are a number of EU initiatives that have been rolled out that can be seen as part of this. The European Defence Fund, which is meant to increase cooperation on defence projects, the so-called Strategic Compass, that, based on a common threat analysis, aims to define the EU's level as a security provider. And there is a military mobility project, which is a flagship project within the EU-NATO cooperation, aiming at facilitating the movement of military troops. And there's also the permanent structured cooperation, the acronym is PESCO, aimed at fostering a sense of military solidarity across the Union. This can be framed, this cooperation, as an economically rational cooperation in defense procurement, but it can also be seen as a step towards a European security community. Having listed these initiatives that are referred to as a part of EU security and defense policy, I think it's important to remind and to refer to EU-NATO complementarity. This is an this is stressed commonly by parties involved on both EU and NATO sides in this ongoing work. Turning to Åland, Åland is not mentioned in EU CSDP acts of any kinds. The demilitarization of Åland is a sui generis project that might be why it's difficult to locate in a European security context. However, importantly, as is well known, I think there is a reference in primary EU law to the status of Åland Islands. It was included in Protocol 2, which was attached to Finland's accession treaty in 1994, where the status is recognized. And also after the Finnish EU accession, the demilitarized status has been confirmed, for instance, in the Lisbon Treaty that came into force 2009. And there is a reference there to that the protocol is still in force. It can also be mentioned that Finland gave a unilateral declaration at this EU meeting of permanent representatives, COREPER it's called, stating that demilitarized and neutralized status of Åland remains in force also after the 2009 entry into force of the Lisbon Treaty. This was in 2010 that this declaration was made. I will turn now to two specific clauses in the security defense field that are of particular importance, I think, for Åland. There are two clauses. They were included already with the Lisbon Treaty in 2009. It's the mutual assistance clause, also called mutual defense clause by some, in Article 42.7 in the Treaty on European Union. And the clause provides that if an EU state is the victim of armed aggression on its territory, and the other EU states have an obligation to aid and assist by all the means in their power in accordance with Article 51 of the United Nations Charter. Article 51 in the Charter is the one that is an exception to the prohibition on the use of force between states. It states that individual and collective self-defense is allowed as a response to an armed attack. I could also mention here in this context that this clause contains a reference to a non-aligned state in the sense that it says that this clause is without prejudice to the specific character of the security and defense policy of certain EU member states. As you know and are aware of, there are a few non-aligned states in the EU of somewhat varying character, but Sweden and Finland are in that group. France invoked Article 42.7 after the 2015 terrorist attacks, the only time it has been invoked. Belgium did not invoke it after the attacks in 2016. The article mainly entails an intergovernmental process between states. It does not set out any formal procedure, and there is, for instance, no council decision needed to start off the process. However, returning to the NATO-EU relationship, I think it's important to point to that part of the article that the duty to assist is subsumed to the relationship with NATO. For instance, to spell it out, it's considered that the EU's mutual assistance clause cannot be invoked if NATO's or the North Atlantic Treaty's well-known Article 5 has already been invoked. The second clause is Article 222 of the treaty, in the Treaty on the functioning of the EU. It's also usually referred to as the Solidarity Clause. It provides that EU states are obliged to act jointly where an EU state is the victim of a terrorist attack or a disaster, natural or man-made. This article has not been invoked so far. So it's interesting to try to turn to a concrete scenario. If an EU member state, for a valid reason, requests access to the demilitarized territory of Åland under the EU Mutual Assistance Clause or the Solidarity Clause, Finland would have to balance the requirements of the demilitarization regime. I'm now assuming that we are in peacetime, against the assistance to be given under EU law and also the requirements of the UN Charter. Here it's appropriate to refer then to the 1921 Convention that we are honoring today. It is very detailed, as was already pointed out here, and contains provision as what is permitted in peacetime, and as was already referred to, exceptions should be, in that case, interpreted restrictively. That concludes my overview of what is most relevant regarding the CSDP and Åland, but finally a few general remarks of a general character. The demilitarisation was intended to prevent war and decrease tension in the Baltic Sea and Northern Europe. Regional cooperation may have that same purpose, and regional cooperation can serve to safeguard the demilitarized status of Åland if pursued with such an intention, and this will contribute to continued stability. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Åsa Gustafsson, and thank you once again to all the speakers for your important contributions to making this seminar and actually this day to such a special occasion. Now the streaming of the seminar ends, and I want to say thank you to those who have been taking part through the streaming. And for us in the plenary hall, it's time for a coffee break. And as I said, the coffee will be served outside here. And the bell will call 3 times when it's time to continue with the panel discussion. Thank you for your attention this far.